This is Ken Pyle, and we're here at the NTCA Finance and Accounting Conference in San Jose, California, and we're with Camille Christiansen and Ira Taylor of Moss Adams. You just spoke about budgeting. And, you know, if I didn't know that accountants were really cool, I would think, what a boring subject. But it really isn't. It really, the way you brought it to the table today, it's something that operators really need to look at as far as moving forward. So why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the rolling budget type stuff you spoke of?
Well, one of the challenges for the industry certainly is, you know, we've lived in an environment for so long where we knew that if we spent money, we were going to get money and didn't have to worry about what the future looked like. Well, now we are in an environment that really, over the last 3 years, has changed multiple times in the course of the year, and budgets were established at the beginning of the year under one framework. Looking in the future could be based on a different framework, and the idea of a rolling budget is, as events happen, you have a more nimble process to allow you to adapt those budgets to really evolve with the changing times rather than be stuck with this model that was based on something that was in place maybe 6 months or a year ago.
One of the things that impressed me about your presentation was it was interactive. And one of the questions you asked, to your point earlier, was, what do you project your revenues to be? And it was something like 59% projected $0 to $2.5 million less. So maybe you can, talk to that a little bit about the idea of where things are going.
Yeah. That's one of the challenges that as the FCC has made changes, really saying let's move more to a broadband market than a voice market in support. A lot of the revenues that these companies have been receiving, really since their inception, have been based on landline voice service. Well, as the FCC is evolving away from that, they've got a lot of support that is phasing down. There's a limit to how much money can be spread between all of these companies. There's rising costs, and so that certainly is driving a lot of those. And Ira probably has a couple other ideas on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, the reform is definitely changing how the old revenue streams were generated in the past. And so, that question a year ago would have probably resulted in even higher dollars before the quantile regression was eliminated and that kind of thing. So, but it's just kind of a way to spark the idea to the audience of, are you really focusing on the important things, the ever adapting to the changes that are coming in place, and do you really understand what that means long term for your company?
Well, and one of the things that impressed me was the idea that, looking at the things that are important, not necessarily looking at 50 things, but looking at the 5 things. And in your case, you had the top 10 things, and I like that list. So why don't you talk to that process a little bit? You don't have to go through all 10 things.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's easy, especially for accountants, to really get caught in details and make processes a lot more difficult than they need to be. We like spreadsheets. You can go crazy with spreadsheets, and so finding a way to really simplify to get to the question, what do we care about? And the answer is we care about big picture. We don't care about minute details. The accountants care about minute details, but for managing a business, we really need to focus on the big picture, and that's really what our top 10 list, I would say, is really designed to do. Is from a big picture standpoint, do we know how to operate our companies going forward? Do we have the best financial information available from a big picture standpoint to do that?
What impressed me was that just how you look at things, just looking at it a different way, and you gave the vendor disbursement as an example, right?
Yeah, that was interesting that, and I would have never thought that would have been the case. When somebody asked the question, I thought, this won't work out, but sure, I'll look at it. And what we found was, almost 70% of payments in a year were concentrated within 30 vendors. Even though you may pay 150, 200 to 1,000 vendors over the course of the year, your dollars really are concentrated within a small group. And, I guess it really kind of ties into, everybody talks about the 80-20 principle, and that was the same demonstration that really it applies everywhere.
And from a going forward perspective, this whole idea of the rolling budget, one of the things that struck me was a comment you said about coming to conferences like this, but not changing behavior. So what's the best way for someone coming out of this conference or someone watching back at home or their business, best way to kind of change that behavior?
Oh, Well, I definitely think it comes down to educating the proper people within the management team and trying to get buy-in by everybody for what changes you're seeing that are important. And a big thing that we see that is important is actually forecasting multi-years, forecasting, the balance sheet, income statement, and cash flows to get the clear picture of what's really happening. And then if you can, trying to incorporate it into an integrated model that really takes into account what is going on with all the changes due to the reform, how does that impact the different revenue streams, whether it's interstate, state, non-reg, and how does that flow back into the internal financials that you present to your board each month.
And from a board perspective?
I think the strategic planning has become very important. That we've seen really at a lot of our clients over the last 3 years, boards have found a lot of value in that and really having somebody external from the company come and moderate it. That sometimes, and I see this all the time as an auditor, if somebody at the company says something, or if I say something as the auditor, suddenly people listen differently. So having somebody really from the outside involved in those strategic planning sessions saying, this is a value, even though the accountants may come here and go back to their company and say, this is a value, having the external person, whether it's the consultant or the accountant, holds some weight, and having more of an open dialogue, I think, helps move toward that.
Well, now I'd imagine, too, it also is easier for someone such as yourself to bring in external information, benchmarking from other companies, right?
Right. Yeah, we certainly have a lot of benchmarking information, which the Tellergy study I mentioned in the presentation, we are one of 7 firms that participate in that. And so most of our clients are in that. We have access to all of the data and can provide a lot of extra insight that somebody else without that information wouldn't be able to have.
Well, I really appreciate both your time and the presentation. Thank you very much.